Hello, thank you for joining us today. My name is Brittany DeFilly. I am the Educational and Outreach Coordinator here at Verteks Consulting. Today we have Steve Hall, one of our senior network engineers going on his 19th year at Verteks. Today we'll be covering Mitel's tips, tricks, and training. Today's will feature Mitel's recording features throughout their contact center, as well as the regular Mitel Connect. And then we'll also dig into a couple of features in the BrightMetrics reporting sector. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Steve. Steve, it's all yours.
All right, thank you, Brittany. Good afternoon. So yeah, as Brittany said, today I'd like to get into reporting, starting with the phone system. We'll look at some contact center reporting. We'll look at and some BrightMetrics reporting, how that can kind of go beyond some of the built-in reporting. So I'm going to bring over the Mitel Connect director. And first thing I want to show is just the basic phone system. So if you just want to look at basic phone system reports, we've got some reports built into the phone system. I'm going to go ahead and log in there with my ID. This brings us to the system dashboard here. System dashboard, some people do kind of consider these reports. These are some graphical reports that show some status about the system right now. I think by default, this dashboard shows a 1 hour time frame, and you can kind of see calls that came in, see information about the calls that came in over the past hour. You can change this dashboard view to 12 hours a day, 7 or 30 days. That's as much as we can get out of this dashboard. The reports I want to bring you over to are actually under this reporting icon in the upper left corner of the Mitel Connect director, the little chart icon here. We're going to open that up, and before I get into run reports, I want to look at some of the report options here. So there's just a few options we can set on these reports. COM port for CDR output. I have yet to see anyone make use of this. There used to be some third-party reporting systems that could receive like serialized input out of the phone system. But like I said, no one's using that I know of. Retention period for CDR data. So how long are we going to keep this call reporting data in the phone system? You see we have our set for 366 days, so that takes care of a full year, including leap years. You can go up to 2,000 days. Now, if you have a very busy phone system, 2,000 days is going to result in a lot of data, and these reports are going to start running very, very slowly. So in that case, you may want to actually shrink that down less than the 2,000, and then you can actually make use of the Cdr Archiving feature. With the archiving feature, it'll take those records that are older than your CDR base retention and move them over to your CDR archive database. And then you can set to keep that up to the 2,000 days. And if you need to, you can run reports against that CDR archive database if you need reports that go back further. So you can tailor these sizes based on what works for kind of how busy your phone system is. If it's a fairly small single office, you know, you could keep it 2,000 days. It's really not going to be a big deal. But if you've got hundreds of users, that's going to bog things down. And then the final checkbox here, this one we get asked about quite a bit. Do you want the reports to include unanswered calls? So if I run a report for, you know, say my extension yesterday, maybe I took a couple calls, maybe I placed a couple calls, and maybe when I was at lunch, I received a couple calls that I didn't answer. If I want to see those unanswered calls show up on the report, I need to check this checkbox to show unanswered calls. So sometimes people will ask questions about why they're not seeing those calls show up on the report, and it's because that checkbox is not checked. So now that we've seen the report options, we'll go and take a look at some of the reports that we have available here inside the phone system. So under reports, call detail reports, up at the top here, we have a list of the pre-built reports that are in the system. There's not a whole lot here. We're going to show some options later to get some more data out of the system and work with it in a little bit, you know, more meaningful ways. But going through these reports, the first one here I'm just going to talk about because we don't have this set up on our system is the account detail reports. These are if you're using account codes. Account codes are typically used if you're trying to restrict access to long distance. So someone types in a long distance number they're trying to call, the system will prompt them to enter in their account code to authorize that long distance call. So that's the primary use for account codes. In some cases, I've seen offices where those account codes are actually tied to specific clients that they may have. So every time I make a phone call, I key in the account code for that client, and that way I can tag all these calls to be related to that particular client. So that's another way that I've seen the account codes used. And then we can run reports on, how many calls, the duration of those calls that used a particular account code. So that's a way you can kind of build back long distance or tie your user's activity to certain clients if you're using them that way. The trunk activity reports, those are pretty handy for looking at trunk utilizations. Let's go ahead and take a look at we'll start with the trunk activity summary report. And by default here, it's showing that it's just focused on today. So I'm going to go ahead and change this. I'm going to open up the calendar here, and I'm going to set this back a month here. So I'm going to go back to May 21st. Time I have it set for, all day, and I can go ahead and choose to run the report. It's going to open up another tab for me here. It's going to chew on that for hopefully just a couple more seconds. And then give us the summary data about our trunk report here. There we go. And so, yeah, as we can see here, we have 23 channels on our PRI. We can see, obviously, channel number 1 gets hit the most because our inbound calls start there and then roll to channel 2 and channel 3, channel 4. So you'll see the channels as they go. Typically, the phone company is going to send you calls starting on channel 1 and then roll down through 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And so when you run a report like this, you will see these numbers descending as you go from channel 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. It can kind of give you an indication of how busy your phone system gets. Like, I can see that on inbound calls, looks like we got to channel 6 at one point, which means we had 6 kind of inbound calls all at once. Typically, the outbound calls are going to start on 23 and work their way down, and typically those are going to kind of meet in the middle. But this is just a kind of a quick summary report, as it says, how many calls we've taken for the last month. We can see it broken down by inbound, outbound, duration, that sort of thing. We got another trunk group, which is tied to our mobility system and our ringleader trunks as well, but the PRI is the one that receives most of our calls. So that's the trunk activity summary report, just some kind of totals for the month, pretty easy. When I look at that one, though, I always like to reference back to that dashboard page that we looked at when we first logged into the system, because this one also has a highest trunk group usage chart right on it. And it shows the same trunk groups that we have. We've got our PRI, our mobility trunk groups, our ringleader trunk group. And we can see throughout, we've got this set on 30 days. We can see, how many trunks were in use. We had a spike of calls last Thursday that was a little bit unusual. I kind of know what was going on there. We were doing some testing, so it kind of makes sense. But, if you see an anomaly in the system, you want to make sure that you maybe can explain why that is. So that's a good visual representation. You're typically going to see in most businesses this kind of 5-day and then slow on the weekends and then picks up for 5 days and slow on the weekends. So that's a pretty typical look at that. So then back to reports, because that one kind of ties into that trunk report. I like to show that one graphically. The trunk activity detail report. So this one, I'm just going to go back a day on this one and run this report. The trunk activity detail, as opposed to a summary, it's going to show me every single call that used any trunk on our phone system. So this is a very detailed report. This one can be handy sometimes if you're doing some troubleshooting and a call came in, maybe it didn't reach somebody. You'll be able to see evidence of their inbound call, maybe hitting the auto attendant, and maybe they hung up after 5 seconds, so they didn't go anywhere, and that kind of explains what happened. Or if you got a long distance charge on your phone bill, but you don't know exactly what user to tie it back to, you can run through here and you could search this for that phone number, and then you'd find kind of the user that made a particular phone call in here. So we can see what channel of our PRI this went out on, date, time, duration, whether it was an inbound call. As I scroll through the pages here, we'll see some outbound calls as well. who made the calls, duration, pretty simple stuff there. So I'm going to go ahead and close that tab, come back to our director. So like I said, the trunk activity shows all the calls that came in on any trunk. User activity is going to be very similar information, but slightly different, because user activity information, let me go ahead and run a detail report. Again, I'll back this up for just a day, so it runs pretty quickly. I have an option here to enter the extension or range of extensions you want to report on, or you can leave the field blank to report on all extensions. So we've got a fairly small phone system here. I'm going to go ahead and leave that blank. There are some options here if you want to kind of break that down into 30-minute intervals, so you can take a look at kind of each slice of the day and see what was going on. And if you want to show internal calls, I'll go ahead and select that. And here we can see, every single call that these users made. You'll also see entities in here like hunt groups and auto attendants, because I didn't filter it by any extension. If we come take a look at an actual user here, we can see some calls here that in some cases we have some calls that were inbound calls where this person was called. We can see outbound calls where this extension originated the call. Again, what phone number, that sort of thing. Like I said, we're going to see similar information to the trunk report, but unlike the trunk report, we're going to see extension to extension calls in here as well. And we'll get totals by user of kind of how much time, how many calls that they've spent on the phone. So that's the user activity detail report. The user activity summary report is going to be the same thing, except it's just going to show us kind of these totals, the number of calls and the duration of the calls on a per user basis if we look at the user activity summary. Now the WAN reports here, there's two different. There's a detail and a summary again. The WAN reports, we're not going to be able to see anything here because we have a single site system here. If you have multiple sites in your phone system and you run one of these WAN reports, it's going to look at calls that went from, site to site. So you'll see calls from site A to site B, or maybe site B to site C, or from site C to site A. Every which way that calls are going to happen. And you'll be able to see in here kind of what the quality of those calls were, what the quality of the network conditions were at the time those calls were placed. Was there jitter? Was there packet loss? Did you have blocked calls? So in the system, we actually configure how much bandwidth you have between sites, and the system will not allow that call to take place if you exceed the site-to-site bandwidth that you specified, so that you don't completely saturate, site-to-site links. Not such a big deal anymore. Voice calls are very small in bandwidth. They are very sensitive to the quality of the bandwidth, but they don't take a lot of it. And so we don't really run into blocked calls a lot. That used to be more common back when you might have, offices linked together by ISDN or T1 lines or something like that. But usually bandwidth isn't the issue these days. It's usually something about a packet loss or jitter, where packets take, a longer amount of time to reach the destination than other packets, and so they arrive out of order, and that can certainly affect a phone call quality. But that's what the WAN report, this shows as a media stream report. Under here, they show WAN media stream reports. Again, you've got the detail and summary, where the detail will show you every single call that traversed your site-to-site links, and a summary will give you those totals. Good place to look for potential issues with the, calls going across your WAN. Work groups, again, we're not really doing much with work groups here. I can run a quick report just to kind of show what the fields are here. Again, I can enter the extensions I want to report on. If I only want to look at certain agents, I can add those in here. Of course, like all the reports, I've got the date and time, and I can choose to run that report, and pops up, and it's going to give me another blank report with just some fields because we're not using a work group here. I can see we do have some users that were actually logged into a work group, but the work group didn't actually receive any calls. So inbound work group calls shows a 0. But you can see, if you are using work groups in your system, this is a good report to see how many calls did the work group take. We can see what the duration, this is an agent-based report, so we can see how long that agent spends on a call on average, how many calls they took that were in the work group versus out of the work group, and what their kind of login time and wrap up time and that sort of stuff was. So how much of the day were they actively participating in that work group and taking calls for the work group. And so we got a few different ones. We can look, like I said, at the work group agent details, or you might want to look at that work group from the queue direction. So you can look at, instead of how did these individual agents perform, how did the queue perform as a whole? What was kind of the average hold time? How many calls sort of didn't get answered, which are abandoned calls? We'll look at that a little bit on some contact center reports because it's very similar terminology, but contact center has that and quite a few more metrics. But those are the built-in PBX reports that we have here. Fairly short list, and they don't give you the ability out of the box to schedule those reports. So we do have some tools that can do that, which I'll show you. All right, so that is it for the PBX reports. The next thing I wanted to take a look at was, if we go beyond that and we have the contact center application connected to our phone system, we have a couple other tools that we can use. Now, the ones that come with the phone system, those are locally installed programs. The first one I'm going to take a look at is contact center reports, still called Shorebird Contact Center Reports. Of course, we know it's Mitel now. Let me bring that over here to this window. When we first open up the ShoreTel Contact Center reports, we kind of get a blank slate here, and we can start to build some reports. Under this yellow folder is where your templates are at. By default, you'll see that there are several templates that they give us out of the box. A lot of them have this like RA or RG kind of prefix and some numbers. These are the pre-built templates that every phone system, every contact center comes with. We can take a look at these. If we take a look at, now, one difference with the contact center reports is we talked about the PBX reports, you can store that data up to 2,000 days. With the contact center, they're a little more restrictive on that. The maximum you can set that to is 2 years worth of reporting data. So just keep that in mind. That's a setting inside your contact center director that you can adjust how long that contact center data is kept for. And so a couple of reports I want to show you, a couple of the most common right off the bat reports people want to take a look at is, again, agent performance report. So similar to the work group report we looked at, how are my agents doing here? I'm going to open this up. We have several different columns to this report. We can look at how many calls were presented to the agent and not answered. They do a really good job in this program of giving us a little pop-up when we hover over one of these column headers. It'll give us details about that column, kind of exactly what that column is trying to represent. And if it's a formula, such as one of these averages, they actually tell us what they're averaging, what number they're taking, what they're dividing it by to give us that average. So now that we've looked at this template, this agent performance by interval, we can, if we want to, we can come out here and we can add columns. That opens up this other window, and there are hundreds of different metrics that we could add to this template, depending on what type of report you're running. Agent reports will have different metrics available than group reports. We can see several of these begin with a percent, so just keep in mind those are going to be a formula that's going to derive that number, rather than an actual fixed number, like how many calls did they take, that sort of thing. As we scroll down a little bit further, we're going to get the actual hard numbers. So like, for example, percent release time. How much of the day or of their login time were they spent on release? So that's going to do the math for you and give you the percentage of that. But we could come down here under these hard numbers, and we could actually find it's going to be cumulative release time is going to give us that hard number if we want to know exactly how many hours, minutes, and seconds that an agent might have been released for, and on break, on lunch, that sort of thing, not taking calls for whatever reason. So there's, like I said, different kinds of numbers in here. Again, they give really good descriptions down here of what those numbers, what those fields mean. And again, if they're a formula, so if we go back to that percent release time, it's going to take that cumulative release time that we were just looking at, divide that by the cumulative login time, and give us that percentage. but I'm not going to add any columns because this built-in one here has got most of the stuff that people are looking for. If we want to run a report, we need to click up here in this top box where it says date from, time from. We need to fill in these parameters of the report. So what do we want to report on? So that's going to open up another box here. I'm going to fill in kind of exactly who I want to report on. So I'm just going to pick a few people here. Say okay to that. And then what dates do we want to report on? So I'm going to go here and choose specific and choose some dates on the calendar here. And I'm going to take a look at, let's say last week. So I'm going to say from the 18th and to the 24th. We're only taking calls 5 days a week unless you reach our hard down message on the weekend. So that'll work for us. Time from, now this opens up this window. I can come in here and say I only want to look at calls between 7:30 in the morning and 6 in the evening, or I can just click on specific and say okay. That's typically what I'll do, unless I have a need to really drill in. I don't want to look at all that data because I'm trying to troubleshoot a problem, and I only want to look at calls that came in between 2:30 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon or something. But I typically am just going to leave that on specific because that's going to encompass the whole day. And then an interval here, whoops, there it is, popped up under another window. An interval, so when you're looking at certain statistics are presented as, what happened during a particular interval, how much of that interval time were they idle, that sort of thing. So you can specify what interval makes sense for you to look at. Let me go ahead and say okay to that. So once we have that those parameters filled in, now we can choose to actually generate that report. So we've chosen our template, we filled in our parameters, what time and who, and we generate it, and now it fills in the data. And so even though I said, begin the report at 12 a.m., it doesn't actually start showing me data until an agent's logged in. So in this case, this agent, our first agent here, Jenna, logged in at 7:15, and so it's not showing me a bunch of empty data when there was no agents logged in. So this is showing me, each specific interval throughout the day, like I said, kind of what happened, and we'll have some summaries at the end. I said that's the agent performance by interval. I'm sorry, actually, let me take a look at, before I go to that one, agent performance by date, because that one's a little bit more clear. I'm going to do the exact same parameters there. We'll select the same dates here. And we'll do that all day. And without the interval parameter, it's a little bit clearer what's going on there. So let me generate this one. All right, so now we see it broken down a little bit more concise. Instead of broken out for every 15-minute interval, we see it broken out just by day here. So we can see each agent, Jenna, Juan, Dave, Chris, how many calls they took on that particular day, kind of what we get real detailed metrics with the contact center, ring time, talk time, wrap up time. If they put the call on hold, we're going to see that. All these different details here. So that's what it looks like to build and generate, kind of one of the basic reports there, the agent by date. Once you kind of get a report the way you want it, you like the columns you have on here. So maybe we look at this and, there's some columns in here that we don't care about. We can actually come in here and remove columns if we want. But once we get this template kind of built the way we want it, we do have the option to come up here and save this report. We give it a name, and we can save it you know, as whatever we want. So let's say we'll call it a test report 1, and we can save it. Now that we have that report saved, of course, we can come in here and run that template anytime we want. The next step is that once you kind of have a template built the way you want it, rather than come in here and open up this program and run it anytime you want to take a look at it, you're probably going to want to set that up on a schedule. So to do that, you've got a report template that you built here, and we have an option here to set up a schedule. So I'm going to take a quick look at that. I'm going to open that up. And it says here, you know, we have a schedule we're going to build here for running this report. And the first thing it wants to know is, when are we going to run that report? Are we going to run it every day, every week, you know, every hour if you want, a particular hour of the day? So now we have to think back to our report templates, because when we built the report, we built it for last week. If we schedule this report to run, you know, every week, it's always going to give us the same report for that last week in the middle of June. Is what that report's always going to look like, because that's what we filled in here on the date from. So what we need to do is, if we're going to schedule a report, we need to think about these parameters again. So we need to open this back up, and our agents are good, but the date isn't going to work there. So we're going to have to use this feature that they have here for saying now minus a certain number of days, and we have to think about kind of what day are we going to run that report on. So in our case, you know, we're open Monday through Friday most weeks. If I think about this, maybe I want to run that report on Sunday, so that I have it available to me every, you know, Monday when I come in. I can see how last week looked. So I can tell this report to look back 7 days and back 2 days from here. So if I'm running it on a Sunday, it's going to be looking back at Monday through Friday. So now that I have that set in that way, now -7 to now -2, I can say okay to that. I can save my template again. And now it actually makes sense to come in here and build my schedule. So I can come in here and give it a schedule. When I'm doing a schedule name, I kind of like to make it match the template name, just because it helps you keep track of different reports in schedule. In this case, we just use the name test report, but it might be a particular department group that you're running the report on. The checkbox right here is very important if you want to synchronize the source template, synchronize with the source template. So if you come in here and make a change to the source template, some agents come or go, and you make some changes to the choices that you've made in the parameters, you're going to want those changes to carry through to the scheduled report that runs every week. So that's an option I think should basically always be checked off. We said we're going to run this every week on Sunday, and we can really run it, you know, any time of the day we want. I'll go ahead and set it for 3 a.m. Once you've chosen that, we need to look at the destination tab. By default, it's set on printer. That usually doesn't make sense in most organizations. We're going to choose the option for file here. And where do we want to save this? So it's got a browse button here. We're going to open that up, and it's going to open up a folder view here for us to choose where we're going to save that. These are folders on the contact center server. These are not folders on your computer. So typically on most contact center servers, we've built a folder for reports, so you can just select that as your destination. Some organizations might have some more folders for different types of reports built. So select where you want that to be. Typically those reports are built and generated, and the file is placed in a folder on the server. But then once we have that set, the system's automatically going to email that to us. So we're not actually going to the server to retrieve those reports. They just sort of accumulate there and eventually kind of purge out. So that part usually doesn't really even matter a whole lot to most people who are using this report tool. As we come down, we have some options here for what format we want the report in. CSV, if you want to take that data and you know, merge it with some other data, then that might make sense. If you want something a little more kind of presentable, then PDF might make sense. So you know, you can choose the different version you want there. I can't do PDF on there. I'll do the Excel format on here. The file name, so when it creates the report, when it creates this Excel file, it's going to have a file name. So what do we want that file name to look like? Do we want to append the date and time so they don't all have the same name? That usually makes sense. So we can add that on there. Of course, you got options for your preferred format for the date and time. And then who we want to email it to. So we can come in here and we can, if you built a few of these, you're going to have some choices in here you can choose. Or you can just, obviously type in an email address. Usually the from is going to be filled out for you, but that can help you identify these. Maybe you've got an Outlook rule to move these to a specific folder, so that can help you with that. And then the subject. So we've got our test report that we built here. So maybe that we put that in the subject. And then do we want to, again, append the date and time so that if we're searching our email for a particular report, we can include that in the search and help us find it. That might make sense. And so we can go ahead and say okay to that. And now we have that scheduled. We can come over here and look at our schedule list under File. And we can see there's test report 1. That's the schedule we just built. That's going to be emailed to us on Sunday mornings for agent performance by date there. Like I said, the agent performance by date is kind of one of the most common reports people want to look at. How are my agents doing? The other one that people commonly want to look at is the group performance by date. So let me take a quick look at that. I'm going to leave the columns here because these are usually pretty good for most cases. And I'm going to choose, kind of what group I want to look at. So we've got a list of our groups in our contact center. We'll take a look at our Mitel team here. Again, what dates do we want to look at? So I can use the calendar here again, since I'm not going to worry about scheduling this report. Sometimes you just want to come in here and look at some data, or maybe work with a template until you get it the way you want it before you decide to save it and schedule it. So now that I've got that filled in, I'm going to generate that and take a look. And so now I can see from a group perspective, so not so much how did each individual agent do, but more of kind of how were the customers that called into this group, how quickly were they handled. So I can see, again, how many calls came in, how many of those calls were answered, how many were abandoned, that sort of thing. Several different statistics here that we can track on a group basis. If you're getting into contact center reports, you kind of probably already have some idea of what it is you're trying to find and what you're trying to track when it comes to your agent performance and your group performance. What are the metrics that kind of management has decided are important? Wait time under a certain number, that sort of thing. Another one we get asked about quite a bit is, I'm sorry, this one doesn't have a template built for it. Well, one of them I want to show here is the abandoned calls log. Let me go ahead and take a look at that one. A lot of times in a call center, someone wants to take a look at not just how many calls were abandoned, but they actually want to see what those phone numbers were. So they can see, maybe these were test calls that were dialed in and abandoned, so we can kind of eliminate those from our metrics. Maybe these were, the same people calling in repeatedly. So it might make sense to look at that. So we can look at an abandoned calls log. So again, we can come up here, we can choose what contact center groups we want to run this report against. We have an option there to select all, so I'll do that. Date, again, we can choose dates on the calendar here. Go ahead and look from the 1st through today. Time, again, like I said, usually unless I have any reason to, I just go specific, so that encompasses the entire day. And then I can generate this report, and I can get a list of all the abandoned calls that may have come in. And so, like I said, you can take a look at the list of numbers there and decide if those can be eliminated from the metrics, or if you maybe want to call any of those back, or kind of whatever you want to do with that one. That one is a pretty common request there. All right, so that is the contact center historical reports. The other reporting tool I wanted to show that's also related to the contact center is called Agent Manager. This is another component of the contact center supervisor tools. When we first open it up, we kind of get this blank slate. Looks very similar to the contact center historical reports, but this is for what they typically refer to as real-time reports. So this is where I can build screens of kind of what's going on in my contact center right now today that I can keep an eye on and make sure things are running smooth and respond immediately if things are not running as I believe they should. So again, you can build some new reports, you can open up some templates. Again, I've already got some different ones built, but I'm gonna go ahead and build one here. So I'm gonna go new. There are a few different types of reports in here. We got real-time reports. So again, these refresh every couple of seconds, show you what's going on right now in the contact center. Hourly summary reports. So you'll kind of see, what's been going on for the past hour. So maybe that makes sense if you want to see how things are trending throughout the day. Or a daily summary if you just want to see kind of cumulative totals as the day goes on, kind of how many calls are coming in, how many calls have my agents taken, that sort of thing. So one of the ones I really like is the daily detailed group report. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. That opens up, and the first thing it asks me is what group do I want to target this report on. I'll go ahead and say our inbound one, where most of our inbound calls come in and hit. All right, so once I've got this report built, it has filled in this with some information for me. So I can see that currently for the day, this queue has accepted 11 calls, a little bit of a slow day. 11 were answered, that's good. I can see kind of, average time, talk time, max time in queue, all these different things. If you're using outbound calls, or callbacks, you'll see down here under the outbound section how many of those calls have been placed. And then down here in the bottom left, we see our agents. This is pretty important. We can see we've got 2 agents logged in. One is idle. One is on a call right now. So another call that comes in should be immediately answered. So that's good as long as we have an idle agent. But this gives us a lot of statistics about one particular group. Another report is the daily brief group report. So in this one, I can take a look at several groups. So in this case, maybe I want to look at the inbound one, the inbound two, and the Mitel team. And I'm going to move this over here to this part of the screen. And so similarly here, I can see that the inbound group has taken 11 calls. That's the same number. This calls in ACD 11 is the same as the ACD calls accepted over here. But I can also see right now there are 2 agents logged in, 1 idle, 1 on a call. Same information, it's just more condensed. There's not quite as many details, but I can put multiple groups into this view to see how several different groups are doing at once. So that one is another group-focused report that's pretty commonly used. Couple of agent reports. Let me go to real time here. And we'll look at group agents report. Again, we'll choose a group here. I'm going to go Mitel team. All right. So this one now I can see the agents that are in this particular group. I can take a look at them here and I can see which ones are logged in, on release, on a call. I can see kind of how many calls they've taken. I can see if they're on a release code. I can see what release code they're currently using. Definitely some handy metrics there. there's a couple other, well, actually, before I get to there, let me talk about saving these. So I've built these reports, and they all say untitled, untitled, untitled. So I'm building this as we go. But of course, this isn't, again, the kind of thing that you're going to want to do every morning when you sit down and log in here and take a look at your call center. So we need to start saving these. So we have our untitled group report that we built here, the daily detailed group report that we built for our inbound one group. We need to save this. So we have a button here to save it. We can also go up to File, Save As, same thing as the toolbar button there. And I'm going to save it as a test report 1, just so we can keep track of it there. And I have an option to either save it as a private report or a public report. So public reports, any other contact center supervisor is going to be able to pull that report up and use it as well. Or if it's a private report, it'll just go in my own list of my own templates. So I can choose that, say OK to that. So I've got that one saved. I can come over here, same thing. I can save this one. Just going to give it a quick name. Test report 2. I'm going to save it as private. Save that one. And then I'm going to go ahead and save this one just so I've got all 3 taken care of here. Oops, 3. Save that one. Once you have these reports all laid out on the screen the way you like, the last kind of step you need to do is come up here to File, Workspace, and Save as Default. And this is what allows this program to open up kind of the same way. So once you kind of get this view set up the way you like it, and you've come up here and you've saved this workspace as your default, when you close the program, the next day you come in and you open up your Agent Manager. I'm going to come over here to this screen, but it's going to have the same reports laid out in the same position that we had them before. So I see we're getting towards the top of the hour. I'm going to go ahead and stop on the Agent Manager because I do want to make sure that I bring over BrightMetrics. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is BrightMetrics. This is an add-on for your Mitel system that can take that call reporting data and allow us to do a lot more with it. It takes both the phone system reporting data that we looked at and the contact center reporting data, and it kind of brings them into one place where we can look at both types of data, run reports that kind of reference both different databases of data, and allow us to do kind of a lot more powerful reports, a lot more customized reports, scheduling, and of course, as you see here, we've got some visualizations. So to begin with, when you first log into BrightMetrics, it brings you to your dashboards at the very kind of top left here. And I've got some dashboards built here. Some of these are, most people have these by default. So call summary is kind of one of the most basic kind of default dashboards that they give you. I can see different types of calls that have come into my system: inbound calls, outbound calls, extension to extension calls, tandem calls. Those are kind of like transfer call forwarding. But inbound, outbound, we can take a look at that. Again, we see this typical pattern of kind of 5 days and then a slower weekend. That's kind of normal. We can take a look at call duration by 30 days. This is, like I said, one of the dashboards they give you right from the bat. Let's see, system summary. This is very similar to the dashboard that we looked at in the phone system that showed, our trunk utilization. That one's always good to look at just to make sure that you aren't overutilizing the phone lines you have from the phone company, and want to make sure your callers aren't getting busy signals. I do have a work group tab in here. Again, we're not really using work groups. We do have a work group that all of our calls come into, and then they're immediately forwarded. So we end up having 0 calls answered, and all the calls are forwarded to the next destination. What I want to get into is looking at some of our contact center dashboards. So I've got a dashboard here built just on our inbound one group. So we can graphically see a lot of the same information that we were looking at in the contact center reports, but they give us, like I said, a nice graphical dashboard to take a look at that information. We can see how many calls were answered by individual agents, the percent of calls answered, those sort of things, abandon rate, average queue times, all the different metrics that a call center is going to be looking for. Same thing for our inbound one and our Mitel group. There's another sort of feature here called ECC Group's real-time status. I want to pull this up. This gives us a look at what's kind of going on right now. So very similar to the agent manager that we were just looking at. We can see different groups. We can see how many calls are currently queued up for these groups. We can see, answered calls by group. We can see agents. We want to know how many agents are logged in and logged out of different groups. Just kind of keep an eye on things throughout the day. So very similar to Agent Manager, except there's several more metrics available here. And one of the neat features that we can do with BrightMetrics here is if you look at any of these in the real-time tab, any of these reports has this open CCGS, which is the contact center or group supervisor. So if I'm taking a look at my groups here and I see one of my groups is getting kind of a long queue time, a lot of callers are stacking up in there. Maybe I've got some agents over here in another queue that aren't taking calls and I want to move them over. A contact center supervisor can click on this and kind of on the fly, they can take one of their agents here and I could grab this agent here. He's currently logged into the Mitel team queue, Nick is. And if I want to log him into, the sales group, I can just select that and apply that, and that'll push him over into the sales group. Another neat feature that you can do with BrightMetrics is that if I'm a contact center supervisor, and like I said, I need to add some agents, I can add agents that are not even logged into the contact center. So for example, I can pick a different person here who's not logged into any groups at all. And if I want to log them into a group, I can select them. I do have to fill in the extension that they're sitting at, so I do need to know what that number is. And I fill that out, and oops. Once I fill that out, I can apply that, and that will log him into that group, even though he does not have the contact center agent web page in front of him. He has not logged in himself. He'll start receiving calls for that group. So that's a handy feature when you're kind of in overflow mode and you need to quickly add some agents to your queues. When you are looking at these different dashboards, I'm going to go back and take a look at our just inbound one. We can see here, here's our agents and kind of how many calls that they've answered over the past 7 days is what this is looking at. If I choose the little magnifying glass here, I can drill into that chart further, and what that's going to bring me to is a more detailed report where I can, first of all, I see the same summary information at the top. You got some choices as to how you want to view that. You've got some report filters. Maybe it's not the last 7 days I want to look at. Maybe I just want to look at the last, what's today, Tuesday. So I just want to look at the last 2 days. So I can apply that. Changes those numbers for me. And then if I want to drill in even further, I can see that, these are links here. You got the little plus sign next to these names here. So if I click on any of these, I'm going to drill in even further. And now I'm going to see those individual calls that made up that number. And I can take a look at, in that case, there were 12 calls answered by this agent. I can take a look at each of those calls, see who they talked to on a call-by-call basis. And then again, we've got the plus sign. This is a link. I can drill into this call even further. And I can see what they call a cradle to grave report of this call. So in this case, this call was fairly straightforward. Outside number called in. They hit our inbound one service. And then they were transferred to the inbound one group. And Ryan was available to take that call. He took that call. He didn't transfer that call anywhere else. He spoke for 7 minutes and completed that call. in this case, you'll be able to see if a call gets transferred around from different people, from different auto attendants. You'll be able to kind of trace that through this. Another neat thing is you'll notice that the bar here for our group, inbound 1, has this little yellow corner dog-eared on it. If I select that, that opens up this team activity tab. I can open that up. I should be able to make this bigger too. This is handy because a lot of times you get a question about, why did this particular agent get this call, or why didn't this particular agent get this call at a particular time? Maybe you thought that they were available and you expected them to get the call and they didn't. If you look at the team activity, you'll see the team being the group here. What were the other agents in this group doing at the time that this call came in? So I can take a look here, and it shows that Chris was logged in, but he was using a release code at lunch during this time. And that's why this call went to Ryan. So you can kind of see, what your agents were doing at any particular moment in time, and, kind of understand who took a call and why. Let's see, you'll also notice, let me go back. So you'll notice over here on the side that this actually brought us into the reports. So we were in dashboards, looking at these charts and graphs on our calls. When we drilled in, it brought us into the reports section. So again, if we come straight to reports, we're going to see an interface similar to what we saw in the contact center or even in the PBX when we were running reports. When you're running data reports and not dashboards out of BrightMetrics, you want to make sure you target on the type of report you're trying to run. So in this case, we have different data sources. We have our ShoreTel phone system, Mitel Connect phone system. We have our contact center, voice analytics. That's another new service that BrightMetrics is offering, and we're not going to be getting into that one today. But you do want to make sure you're selecting the right data source here. You're looking at contact center reports or phone system reports. Another thing that comes up a lot is somebody will run a report in the contact center for an agent, and they'll say, well, I don't think this is all the calls that they placed because they spent half their day doing an outbound call campaign where they were given a list of numbers to call. Well, they might have been logged out of the contact center, and that's why the contact center report for that agent doesn't show outbound calls that they placed. And so that's a situation where if they were not logged into the contact center, you're going to want to run that user activity report using the phone system data rather than the contact center data. And so very similar to what we looked at in the phone system, if I run a user activity report, again, it's got a template that's kind of already built. If I want to leave this as it is, I can choose just to run the report. And it's going to show me, all the calls that were placed, received by all these different users on the phone system. If I select one of these calls, again, I'm going to get that cradle to grave. In this case, this was another inbound call. This one called this user's particular DID, so there's no auto attendant involved. This one's real simple because I called in, the agent answered. You'll also see that we have the Mitel call recorder involved here. So you'll see it tied into the call, and then you'll also see a recordings tab. So if you do have the Mitel call recorder and you have BrightMetrics, this makes an easy way to access your call recordings because you get a tab here that shows you the access to the recording. All right, and with that, I see we are almost at the top of the hour, so I think I'll stop there. We probably will do a more detailed training in the future, going into BrightMetrics a little bit further, but I hope everybody got something out of that today, and I appreciate everybody joining.
Yeah, absolutely. That was fantastic, Steve. We'll give everybody just a second or two to see if there's any questions that pop in. Other than that, we'll give you back those few more minutes. Looks like most people are dropping off. Again, we greatly appreciate everybody joining us today, and thank you. And we will have our next webinar. It will be next month, and it will be on end user tips, tricks, and training. We may end up trying to switch that up a little bit. If you guys want to hear anything more about BrightMetrics, just let us know. I will be sending out the recording towards the end of the day today, and then Robert will follow up with you guys if you have any questions. Yep, thank you again, everybody.